in the deepest, most neglected corner of the Hartford Historical Society, a place where time itself seemed to have settled like a fine layer of dust. Dr. Sarah Mitchell felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. This wasn't a hunt for artifacts, but for whispers, the faint, lingering echoes of lives lived, trapped in the silver of old photographs and the brittle pages of forgotten letters. For 15 years she had been a historian of ghosts, an academic who specialized in the silent, stoic faces of early American portraiture. She believed every photograph was a doorway, and today, one stood slightly ajar. It was leaning against the cold, indifferent steel of a filing cabinet, a relic of a different age. The ornate dark wood frame, carved with intricate leaves and vines, was a piece of art in itself, but it was the image it held that seemed to generate its own gravity. At first it was a perfect, almost sterile, example of its kind, a wedding portrait, dated 1903. The groom stood stiffly, a man whose face seemed chiseled from granite, his eyes holding the flat, unimpressed gaze of his era. Beside him, the bride was a vision in white, her gown a cascade of lace and intricate beadwork. Her face, however, was a mask of placid solemnity, her posture rigid, her hands resting just so. It was a scene Sarah had witnessed 1,000 times, a tableau of Victorian convention, but as she lifted the heavy frame, an unsettling feeling, like a cold draft in a sealed room, prickled her skin. Something was profoundly wrong. She carried it over to the large arched window, where the afternoon light struggled through a century of grime. In the hazy glow, the photograph seemed to exhale. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, illuminating microscopic details on the albumen print, the delicate weave of the bride's lace veil, the faint painted backdrop of a pastoral scene, the severe part in the groom's hair. And then, her gaze locked onto the bride's face. "Just another wedding portrait," she whispered, the words a hollow attempt to reassure herself. But her mind was already racing, cataloging the inconsistencies. The quality of the photograph was superb, suggesting a top-tier studio. The couple's attire bespoke a comfortable, middle-class prosperity. On the back, a delicate looping script offered the barest of clues. Thomas and Elizabeth, June 15, 1903, Hartford. No family names. No photographer's stamp. It was an island, disconnected from any official history. As she turned from the window, a final, brilliant spear of sunlight pierced the gloom and hit the glass at a perfect, fleeting angle. In that incandescent moment, the image transformed. The bride's serene mask seemed to ripple, and Sarah saw it. A flicker. An anomaly so subtle and yet so seismic, it sent a jolt through her entire body. It was something that defied the laws of early photography, a ghost in the machine that had gone unseen for over a century. Her heart began a frantic, percussive rhythm against her ribs. This was no longer an academic curiosity. This was a puzzle box, and she had just heard the faintest click of a lock beginning to turn. Back at her cluttered analysis desk, under the unforgiving white light of an adjustable lamp, Sarah became a forensic investigator. She retrieved her most powerful magnifying glass, its polished lens a portal to the past. She lowered it over the print, and the world dissolved, leaving only the granular texture of the bride's face. She held her breath. Had she imagined it? A trick of the light? But there it was, barely perceptible yet undeniably present. A secret that had been hiding in plain sight. The bride was smiling. It was not a smile for the camera. It was not the practiced, toothy grin of modern times. This was something far more intimate and complex. A subtle, Mona Lisa-like upturn at the corners of her mouth, an expression that could have vanished in a heartbeat. It was a flicker of pure, genuine emotion that seemed to tremble on the very edge of joy, or perhaps the edge of something else entirely. "Impossible," Sarah breathed. Her rational mind, steeped in the technical limitations of the period, rebelled. To hold a genuine, unforced smile for the agonizingly long seconds of a collodion plate exposure was a physical feat few could manage. More than that, it was a social taboo, a breach of the solemn dignity expected in a formal portrait, especially one meant to commemorate a marriage. The groom, by contrast, was a pillar of convention. His stern expression was a testament to the era's demand for propriety. He and Elizabeth seemed to exist in two different emotional universes within the same frame. It was as if she were communicating a secret, not with her new husband, but directly to the lens, to the future, to anyone who would look closely enough to see. The search for answers became an obsession. Days were spent poring over microfiche, the whirring of the machine a soundtrack to her frustration. Wedding announcements from every Hartford newspaper in June of 1903 yielded nothing for a Thomas and Elizabeth. It was as if their marriage, this pivotal moment in their lives, had been deliberately erased from the public record. A kindly, sharp-eyed librarian named Eleanor, who had presided over the history room for 40 years, peered over her spectacles at the photograph. "Sometimes the most important stories are the ones nobody wanted told," she mused. "Have you tried the church records? God's books are often more complete than man's." This advice led Sarah to the hushed archives of Trinity Episcopal Church. A young, enthusiastic reverend helped her navigate the heavy, leather-bound marriage registers. Together they traced the elegant, spidery script of 1903. June 13th, the reverend read, "A Thomas Martin to an Elizabeth Hayes." Then on the 20th, "A Thomas Richardson to an Elizabeth Collins." He shook his head. Nothing at all for the 15th, and certainly not with only first names. Was there any reason a marriage might be discreet? Sarah asked, her voice low. The reverend considered this. Oh, certainly. To avoid a scandal, a bride already with child, or perhaps a union between families who were sworn enemies. Those ceremonies were often done quietly, the records sometimes adjusted, to protect the families. The possibility of a forbidden romance was a compelling narrative, but it didn't align with the chilling undercurrent she felt from the portrait. This felt less like a secret love and more like a warning. Frustrated, she returned to the artifact itself, convinced it held more clues. With the delicacy of a surgeon, she began the painstaking process of removing the photograph from its frame. The old wood was brittle, the backing sealed with time. As she finally eased the print free, a tiny folded slip of paper, as fragile as a moth's wing, detached from the cardboard and drifted to her desk. Her breath caught in her throat. Unfolding it felt like desecrating a tomb. The ink was faded to a ghostly brown, but the words were a lightning strike that illuminated the entire mystery. My dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be far from Hartford. The photograph must tell the story I cannot. Look for what others cannot see. Remember our signal. Forever yours, E. Our signal. The phrase echoed in the silent room. The smile. It had to be the smile. It was a deliberate coded message. But the note implied there was more. Look for what others cannot see. Her eyes flew back to the photograph. She scanned every inch, every shadow, every fold of fabric, and then she saw it. Elizabeth's left hand, half obscured by her voluminous skirt, was not in a position of rest. The fingers were subtly but intentionally arranged. Sarah plunged into the esoteric world of Victorian covert communication. She learned of the language of flowers, the silent dialogue of a handheld fan, and then, in a rare 1902 etiquette guide titled The Silent Companion, she found a chapter on manual telegraphy. It was a system of discreet hand signals, a secret language for women trapped in the gilded cage of social decorum. She frantically scanned the diagrams, her heart pounding. There it was, an exact match for the position of Elizabeth's fingers. The text beneath the drawing was stark and terrifying, a signal of dire distress. Imminent danger. All is not as it appears. I require immediate assistance. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was not a wedding portrait. This was a hostage photograph. The smile was a mask of unimaginable courage, the hidden hand a desperate, silent scream for help that had gone unanswered for 120 years. The academic quest was now a moral imperative. Sarah unearthed the missing person report for Elizabeth Hayes, the same name from the church register. Filed by her sister Margaret, it confirmed Elizabeth was last seen on July 15th, the date on the photo. The report led Sarah to the old Hayes family home, now a subdivided apartment building. An elderly tenant remembered a story about a trunk of old papers found in the attic decades ago. After hours of searching through the dusty, stifling space, Sarah found it. A small wooden trunk containing Margaret Hayes's diary. The diary was a time capsule of terror. Margaret's elegant script detailed Elizabeth's whirlwind, secretive courtship with a man named Thomas. After their supposed wedding, Elizabeth had become a ghost of her former self, her smiles hiding a deep-seated fear. Margaret discovered Elizabeth wasn't living with Thomas at all, but was hiding in a small room above a downtown bakery. In a tearful confession, Elizabeth admitted the marriage was a sham, a desperate measure to escape a terrible situation she was too frightened to explain. The final coherent entry, dated July 14th, was chilling. Elizabeth had come to her sister in a panic, claiming Thomas was a dangerous man and that she had discovered something that would get her killed. She pressed the photograph into Margaret's hand, saying, "If something happens, this will explain everything." The next day, Elizabeth vanished. But who was the mysterious, menacing Thomas? A 1903 Hartford City directory provided a name: Thomas Miller, occupation listed as private detective. The address of his office was just 3 blocks from the bakery where Elizabeth had been hiding. At the museum, the curator, Dr. Walsh, paled when she mentioned the name. Men like Miller, he explained grimly, operated in the shadows. They were fixers, hired by powerful men to make problems disappear. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place with a sickening finality. A series of articles from May 1903 detailed a massive embezzlement scandal at the Hartford National Bank. Over $50,000, a fortune at the time, had been stolen. The bank's president had hired a private detective to conduct an internal investigation. Thomas Miller. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the last crucial entry from Margaret's diary. In the spring of that year, Elizabeth had been thrilled to secure a respectable job as a secretary at the Hartford National Bank. The web was complete. Elizabeth, in her new position, must have stumbled upon evidence that the celebrated detective was, in fact, the mastermind behind the theft. Miller, realizing he'd been discovered, must have staged the fake marriage as a way to control her, to isolate her, to silence her. The portrait session was his act of control, but it became her act of defiance. The final confirmation came from a police report on Thomas Miller's death, just 2 months after Elizabeth disappeared. It was officially ruled an accident, but the investigating officer's notes told a different story. A search of Miller's office revealed a hidden compartment in his desk, containing nearly $30,000 in cash and bank documents forged with Elizabeth Hayes's signature. A final, chilling note from the officer concluded, "It is this officer's belief that Miller coerced Miss Hayes into aiding his scheme, and that her disappearance is a direct result of her threatening to expose him. His death bears the hallmarks of a suicide to avoid imminent arrest and prosecution." Sarah leaned back, the weight of the last 120 years pressing down on her. Elizabeth Hayes was not a victim. She was a hero, a woman who had faced pure evil and had ingeniously turned her own death warrant into a map, a cry for justice that had finally been heard. The story, when published in the Hartford Courant, caused a sensation. It led Sarah to Patricia Hayes, Elizabeth's frail, elderly great-great-niece, who had grown up with the vague, sad family legend of an aunt who had vanished after getting involved with a bad man. Standing before the portrait together, Patricia touched the glass, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "We always wondered," she whispered. "Now we know she was brave." Today, the portrait of Thomas and Elizabeth hangs alone on a prominent wall in the Hartford History Museum. A detailed plaque tells the full harrowing story. Visitors now lean in close, not just to see a photograph, but to bear witness. They see the lie in the groom's eyes, the incredible courage in the bride's smile, and the desperate, silent signal of her hidden hand. They see the story of a woman who, knowing her fate was sealed, orchestrated a way for a simple photograph to speak the truth. A truth that, after more than a century of waiting in the dust and silence, was finally thunderously heard.